Thank you, Anne, for inviting me. My name's Sam, and I work for an organisation called Arts Admin, which is based over there. So we have studios that we hire out to various artists and artist groups over there, as well as we're an organisation which produces artist projects. So we have always worked with artists who have kind of a various sort of social consciences within their work. So people like Heather Ackroyd and Dan Harvey, we've been working with them for the last 30 years. People whose work has always had elements of ecology within their work. And I think today what I'd like to talk about is Arts Admin's work within climate change and what we are doing. And hopefully there'll be some links back to what people have already talked about or are talking about in terms of slow revolutions and how we make this kind of social change. Also, I know it's quite a spicy topic, so I'm excited to hear any questions that might come out of it. So I work at Arts Admin as the education producer, and all the projects I work with various communities, often quite locally, to here. And I think all the work that we do is around that I work with, is around sort of social justice, and climate change I see as kind of a big part of that. Arts Admin's programme, since sort of 2008, is kind of made up of these things, so around climate change. So the Imagine 2020 network is a network of 13 organisations across Europe who've committed to make work with artists, supporting artists around climate change, and their venues, their producing organisations. And everyone works within a kind of context of kind of live, performative work. So that's what various groups do. So some people host festivals and programme lots of work. Some people commission new work within that. If you go down to the Summer Labs, is 5 of those organisations come together each year and make a kind of week-long laboratory for artists, engineers, scientists to kind of get together and look at issues around climate change and what can happen when they come together. So they've been in France, Portugal, this year it'll be in Croatia, and next year will be in the UK. The other thing that we do is we have our 2 Degrees Festival, which runs out of this building and in the area. This is a piece from 2009 from the Laboratory of Insurrectionary Imagination, which some of you may know some of the artists involved in that. And they kind of see themselves as a kind of post-capitalist group who are trying to make these kind of imagine spaces. So this is a series of works that was one of the big commissions, the first ones we did for 2 Degrees, where these wheelbarrows have super long arms to them, and they can create massive teepees quickly. So they turn up and they can create these spaces in which people can sit. They bring your kind of what you need and create these temporary villages. And this is in Bishopsgate, just across the road near Liverpool Street in the City of London. So we're kind of interested in those projects within the festival. And the festival will be happening in June this year as well. It's every 2 years. We also commission new work, collectively as the Imagine 2020 network and individually as organisations. The most recent piece we did was working with an artist called Michael Pinsky around, in 1,000 years' time, 1,000 years, where will the water lines in London be? And so we covered kind of monuments in London with kind of neon blue rings that kind of symbolised that. And then we kind of had a whole programme of education works that went around that and really looked at what can we do to kind of stop these things happening. And also a lot of the work that our director, Judith Knight, does is with setting up these conferences called Slow Boat, which is looking at how the arts can sort of green itself. You know, I think we've become a bit reliant on, EasyJet to get our touring work out to places and to make sure we're moving around and our work is being seen. And this is looking at how can we create other ways. And the most recent project is that we're working with the New Economics Foundation on their Great Transition report, which I don't know if people know the New Economics Foundation. Yeah? No? Some? They write amazing reports around, there's this one, the Great Transition. They also do one around the 21-hour week, looking at how we change our kind of working patterns. So it's really interesting to work with them and team up artists with their kind of projects. So have a look at them. So these are some of the projects. We also, in 2011, worked with an artist called Claire Patey, who teamed up with Bob. That's Crayfish Bob, that's his name. And he, every morning, fishes out an invasive species of crayfish from the Thames. And the Rivers Authorities have said these are perfectly edible. So Claire made this shack that could tour, and he could set up a pop-up restaurant with the invasive species of crayfish from the Thames. So that shack's gone to Glastonbury, and it's gone to other places as a kind of pop-up restaurant. So these are kind of some of the things that the festival that we programme, 2 Degrees, is looking at. We're looking at kind of positive ways of creating a context, really, that people can get involved and take action in some way. And maybe that's a really small thing, like booking a table at a crayfish restaurant. Or maybe that's a big thing, like saying, I'm going to go and be part of a post-capitalist tent party in Bishopsgate. But I think there's sort of what I've noticed in the work that we've produced and other organisations kind of work with and artists work within, there's kind of 2 approaches to how people look at climate change. And I think there's one which is the kind of analytical data collection. So looking at how artists can team up with scientists and engineers and illustrate these kind of unfathomable kind of things that maybe these artists can create ways that maybe strikes a chord with us. How does it make us feel in some way? And there are brilliant organisations like Active Ingredient and Hey Hey and lots of other people who do that. But then I think there's also the other, so this is one that's currently showing in Brussels that I think does that quite well. The other aspect is people who create kind of experiments or temporary spaces that look away from the current systems that we're within and try and find alternative ones that are socially, ecologically just in some way, creating these new experiments. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to concentrate on a bit more on today. And I think within these experiments, these kind of imaginings that happen, people are trying to say 2 things. They're trying to say yes, and they're trying to say no. There's a critique of a current system that's happening, and I think that's kind of what we do with kind of regular protest, is that we create this critique. We're saying no, we don't want that, we want to stop something. But what these projects do is say yes. They say, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to construct, this is a possible other option. And I think a lot of the time, we don't know what the other option is. So maybe working with artists in this way is a way of seeing that there could be another way of being. And I didn't want to just concentrate on a sort of series of projects necessarily that I've worked on. So there's kind of a few here that I'm sort of inspired by and have been part of in some way, but also have learnt a lot from in my own practice, and a lot of the artists we've worked with have been involved with as well. So do people here know about Grow Heathrow? Yes? Okay. A split. Okay, so a group of activists who were trying to stop airport expansion in the UK, called Plain Stupid, kind of went about it in the traditional ways. So traditional sort of activist ways. So they would sort of put D-locks around their necks on runways and stop planes from landing, or they would throw banners down the front of Westminster, things like that. They would kind of stand up in hustings and try and make their point. And they kind of realised that actually this was the saying no, but what do we want to create in this space? What is the third runway at Heathrow going to do? And what do we want it to do instead of that? So there's this, Sipson is the town near Heathrow that was going to be demolished for the third runway. So they went down there and they found this area that used to be a market garden. So this is the space when they found it. And it had been used for braking cars, and the council really hated this space because they couldn't find the owners. They didn't know how to fix it up. So the group of people brought in loads of friends, families, and spent sort of weekends and weekends clearing this space, to a year later where it now looks like this. For me, it's a hugely inspirational project because it's something that's saying, this is what we can do. This is what individuals can do. And it wasn't a project that, it was squatting the land, but it was also saying, actually, we're here with you. This is a space where you can use as gardens. Let's work together. So it worked really closely with the residents there. And also local MPs were really involved in the project. They liked seeing this happen. People hosted artist residencies here. And it became a fertile land. And then using kind of various technologies, basic ones, so like straw bale rooms were built, and all the local kids kind of joined in and did that. They have a bike workshop. So it's really become a kind of central point within Sipson. And the third runway was cancelled. Now, it's not necessarily that linear, that this happens and then and that's the effect. But, and also it's sort of in flux still at the moment because with changes of government, things change all the time. But it kind of showed that people had a stake in this, and this was a group of 10 people who started this. And it's become a kind of huge example of what those 10 people could do. And I think we're kind of often saying, we don't know where we sit. We don't know how what we can do can make a difference when it comes to climate change. I think it seems like such a huge thing, and the only thing we know we can do is recycle. But actually, maybe there is other things that we can do. Sort of following the same tact, really, I wanted to talk about a recent project. Do people know about Lazad? Okay. So Lazad is an area outside of Nantes, well, within Nantes, but on the outskirts, that's about 4,000 acres of land that's owned by various farmers, sort of independently. And in 2009, French Climate Camp came to that area and started to work with those farmers and build kind of architecture and spaces. Really kind of community architecture. Some stuff fell down, some stuff kind of was created that was new. And it's really interesting. So anyhow, an organisation called Vinci, which is one of the biggest construction companies in France, is basically trying to build a runway over these areas now, which will be Nantes' second runway. Recently, this year, Nantes has been awarded the European Green City of 2013, and apparently this runway will be a green runway. The buildings will have grass roofs on them, things like that. To call it double speak is a bit ridiculous. So yeah, within here, these spaces has been made in this kind of autonomous area where people were kind of creating this other way of living. They weren't necessarily following kind of state rules or laws, and so the police came in and tear gassed the market gardens that fed the communities, poisoned the land. This is what happened. 4 weeks later, they made a call after everything was kind of removed. They also bulldozed all of the spaces that had been made and removed them, so there was no materials to rebuild with. 4 weeks later, reportedly 40,000 people came together with 20 tractors filled with the building materials to make a new space. And for me, the kind of collaboration that works here is incredible. How people can work together to create these spaces, how people who aren't trained in building buildings can make them, and how this kind of carries on to kind of create this kind of space. It looks a bit like an Asterix kind of encampment. But I think for me it's really inspiring to see that these things are possible, and to see that people are working together with farmers and making these sites, which I think are really beautiful actually, to make these. Cool, better hurry. So I guess they're just two examples that I wanted to say around how people are saying yes, how people are saying this is a way of living. And I understand that it's not something that maybe is possible on a grand scale, but what it is these little imaginings that give us sort of ideas that we can do something and how we can do it. And I think something that we do here at Arts Admin is that we work a lot with artists who are trying to kind of create a public space or create a space. I think Richard Sennett says it really well. In public, people can access unfamiliar knowledge, expanding the horizons of their information. In public, people can discuss and debate with people who may not share the same assumptions or same interests. Democratic government depends on such exchanges between strangers. And kind of within that, this was kind of a basis for a group called The Haircut Before the Party, who I work with at Arts Admin. This is a group, a collective, that worked in squatted spaces running hairdressing salons. They weren't hairdressers, they trained through YouTube. And they had a lot of sort of trusty people who let them test things out on them. We started working with them at this point, and they were really interested in how could this be something that was taken out of a particularly exclusive area and bought as a kind of service that could exist on a high street. So we worked together to find this space, which is just around the corner. And people could come in and get a haircut. In exchange, they would talk about politics of the area, about their personal politics. It was a space for this exchange, but it wasn't a monetary exchange, and that was kind of what was important on that high street kind of space. And so this is the kind of setup. It's pretty simple, all made from reclaimed material. And they were open 3 days a week. So it became, their hairdressing skills really improved through a lot of the guys who live on the estate behind came in and taught them how to do fades on men's hair, how to do detailing in the back of hair, things like that. In exchange, they could borrow their tools. It was a really interesting space where that would happen. These are some of the haircuts. Some are dodgier than others. That's mine. Mine's a bit wonky. But so we worked in there for 6 months. And to begin with, all the conversations were just around, why is it free? I don't understand. What's this about? And that was kind of a good starting point. But later on, it came around, subjects kind of came from the conversations to things like debt or housing, things like that. And then in the last month, the space was let to anyone who wanted to use it for whatever means they wanted to. So it played host to community dinners, film nights, poetry nights, and ad hoc sort of training for hairdressers. Actually, I'm not going to show that. There's a video around what happened, and what they started to doing was they decided to close the shop and to take a chair out onto the streets. And so this is from the demo around June the 30th, where it was the big kind of teachers' strikes, and they went in the morning to the picket line and cut people's hair on the picket lines, and then joined the demo. And obviously this is quite a handy, eye-catching press media attention thing as well in a demo, which meant that the people sitting in the chair kind of got to talk to the BBC, to the Guardian, whatever, about their opinions of why they were there. So it worked quite well like that. And then they started to tour to other places in London that were sort of self-set up spaces. So this is the London Bike Kitchen that Jenny runs, which is a space where you can come and learn to fix your own bike, rather than have someone service it and then you go away without the skills. And it actually led to the project becoming a touring project. And the group created a kind of line of flight across Europe where they set up in public spaces in Rotterdam, Stockholm, Copenhagen, various things. And it was really interesting because when you set up this space in public, you reach a whole different group of people than you would necessarily with the gallery or with a shop, things like that. And now they're collaborating with other groups that kind of look at politics and hairdressing. This is the Open Barbers that look at gender and what it means, how you discuss that through your hair, how you wear your politics. So together they're kind of teaming up to kind of create an academy of self-taught hairdressers. So at the end of the year, there may be the first kind of hairdressing academy, which will be quite exciting. And then the last project that I really want to talk about is a project that we're working on at the moment. So it's really kind of in its seedling stage. And we're working with an artist called Andrea Frank, who is really inspired by this book, which some of you probably know. It's what Steve Jobs referred to as Google in the 60s. And is a really amazing kind of book that kind of has examples of how you can kind of be self-sufficient. It's this kind of, the 60s, 70s kind of movement of self-sufficiency, kind of compiled into diagrams, squidged onto pages. And from this book, she's taking this idea of making, but a non-professional making, and how do we kind of bring that into our everyday lives. So we're working with East End Homes, which is a housing association in the area, and on the ground floor of their block of flats in Shadwell, we're creating a kind of making space where children, families, people can come together and learn to make. And Andrea's not a professional furniture designer, but the first sort of thing we'll be looking at how we make furniture for spaces. We'll be looking at how you can get materials from around the area that are thrown out on certain days, mapping that, seeing where we can get free materials to make these things from, and kind of bringing them back to the space and activating that. These are some of the projects that she's done already, looking around play and children working and making together. So it's kind of one of the projects that we've started, and it's part of the 2 Degrees Festival this year. And it's kind of an odd idea having this climate change festival that is a kind of splash for a week, where a lot of the work takes a really long-term build-up and commitment to the people we're working with. But we sort of are trying to manage both of those things. How can we create a quick splash of sort of interest in this area, but also how do we have a long-term commitment to the project? So this is a 6-month project that's happening with East End Homes, and then we'll see whether we can continue that or whether the people within the flats will be taking on the project. That will be sort of worked out with everyone who gets involved in it. So yeah. And what I was sort of thinking was actually, what is it that gets us involved in these movements, and what makes us want to do them? And I think it is this element of taking joy. It's taking joy in what it is that we do. I mean, that's why I do what I do, because it feels right. There's an intrinsic, this feels right. And I really like this quote around that joy can be an act of insurrection. I think that's that kind of element of how can we, through arts, through craft, through activism, be active. How can we be able to make our points? How can we be able to even understand what our points might be? How we meet people, how we find those spaces. And I think that is what we do through arts and through making, is we test things out and we try things differently. And that's kind of what these projects are doing, is it's kind of testing where we go, where do we go, what do we do next? And I don't think necessarily it always works, but what it does is give us an option to think beyond where we're at. Yeah, maybe that's a good point to sort of start